Before we can proceed with putting any of the carlins and the ledges, it's very clear that we have to make the main topsail sheet bit and the main gear bit. And although I've been very complimentary of these books almost from the start, I'm just in awe of them, I finally found a point to criticize the practicum. And that is, although the information that you need is here, it's actually hidden in plain sight. And it's taken me 3 days of reading, double reading, checking, to finally get to the basic numbers. By now you know that since I have no one to discuss this build with, the discussion is actually held by myself and a piece of paper. So what I do is I read the book and I write down all the information and I read it again and I say, oh, I made a mistake. And I scratch it out and I write down the information. And just to get to the numbers has really been a challenge. In many cases, Greg solved this problem by having scale drawings in the book, which would allow you to put a ruler and get the specific measurements. But in the case of this particular piece, there are no scale drawings, there are artist's impression of what the piece would look like. And so I wasn't able to get defined measurements off of any of the drawings in the book. So here we are with the main topsail sheet bit. And whereas I was able to determine all of these numbers, the top side of the numbers were very difficult to get, in particular the distance between here and here. I was able to go back to the early part of book 1, and from this diagram at the bottom, which is the scale, I was able to pull off the correct dimension. However, in the top part of the bit, I had trouble working out what the overall height was and what the size of this decoration was. And I actually used this drawing to estimate what the size of the piece was. So with that in mind, most of this video is actually going to be made up of how we made the main topsail sheet bits, and hopefully I'll get it right. The other interesting thing is part of the challenge that you have is when you go to, in this case, establish where the upper floor goes. And of course I haven't put it in place yet. I actually have to leave it out, or I can put it in temporarily, knowing that the odds are when I actually put it in, there will be a slight variation, and either I need to put some shims and recut this, or I'll have to make it all over again. Let's just quickly go through the bulk stock. There are the 2 bit pins, which are 9 by 9, 9 inches by 9 inches by 150 inches long, and these are going to be tapered from here down. There's the gallows, which is 7 by 11 and is 96 inches across. There's the cross piece, which is 6 by 8 and is 99 inches long. Then there are 2 blocks, which are 2.5 by 9 by 14. And then there are the 2 decorative pieces, which are 2 by 11 by 21 inches, and we'll show you how you make that up later. The first challenge we have is to make up the gallows crosspiece, and to do that we need some special tools. I was fortunate a few years ago to purchase this shaper from Proxon. Fantastic tool. Allows you to move the fence to either side depending on the cut that you have to make. They supply lots of bits for it, and you can buy third-party bits at Micromart. The first one I used is this half round, which had a shank on it, and that allowed me to start shaping the edge. Of course, you have to take many passes at it, and it was a bit of a challenge because the piece kept moving and kicking back. I clamped it a few times. Eventually, by taking small bits each time, I was able to get the shape I wanted. Then I used this small half round that has no shank on it, and that allowed me, by switching the fence around, to cut the second curve on the piece, and in the end it worked out pretty good. To cut the piece in the center, the curve in the center, we used this round bit, and we had to get a sacrificial piece of wood which we clamped the piece to, and that allowed us to create this very unique shape. Of course, you see me doing it on one side, and then so that everything is even, you simply flip the piece around and do the exact same cut on the second side. And then back to manual tools, files and sanders of various points to get the specific shape that is shown in the book. And I was very happy at the end result. First thing we do is set the height of the blade, and we have a template which sets it at 1.5 inches. The first cut is at 65 inches, and that's what 1.35. So we set the caliper at 1.35. If you've never done this before, the odds of you making a mistake are pretty high. You need to remember to take into consideration the thickness of the blade when cutting the score for both the beam and for the bit crosspiece. Again, just think it through, take your time. If you're uncertain, have a sacrificial piece to do a check. But once you're certain, you just go ahead and cut it. The recess was 1.5 inches for both of them, and that's the depth we used in all. Then we decided to make a mortise and tenon, so we actually had the bit pin taller than we needed, and we created a tenon at the top and then cut a mortise into the gallows and then fit the two. It was a bit of a risk, but I think my skill level is such now that I can make these pieces. So we set it up and had difficulty squaring the piece. So what I did is I made up a blank, the thickness of the width between the two bit pins, and then put that in a vise, and that means that the piece would go together absolutely square. And then of course I used a square to make sure that they were exactly at the height. Clamped them up to make sure I had a nice join, and then stuck the bit crosspiece in. And keep the glue to a minimum to minimize the cleanup, and of course once you put it in, the best time to clean it up is right at the same time. We let it dry for about 1.5 hours, and then we'll pin the bit crosspiece into the bit pins. Now we're going to make up the block cheeks, which sit just under the crosspiece, and we're doing this on the pre-arc. I'm sure many of you have made up small parts like this. The sheave is 7.5 inches by 1 1/8 thick. So we add 2/8 to the width of the cut, and I would add at least 1/4 inch on the top and bottom of the sheave to work out the slot. I used thin CA to stick the piece on, and then went and drilled out the second sheave, and I was not happy with how this came out. The carlin under the mast part now, it has to sit flush down in the recess. So we've put it in place, and so it doesn't move, we're actually going to stick it with CA. What you have to make sure is that when you put the carlin in, it's really flush to the recess and doesn't stick up, so that you get the partner sticking at the correct height. We put the second one in following the same procedure, and that went pretty well. The other thing that's starting to happen is the carlin closest to the side of the ship. We need to start pulling that in a bit, so I can no longer use this square to get them in. because it's starting to follow the curve of the top side of the ship. This brings this session to an end. So now we'll go on to 13 and 14, and we'll see you in the next video.